Welcome back to another episode of Outwitting Statistics in Search of a Better Business, where we unpack the tips, tricks, hacks, mindsets, resources that entrepreneurs are using to have a successful business. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Morgan Oakes. I'm incredibly excited to have him on the podcast. He's one of the first people on the podcast that we've not had prior business relationship. Spent a little bit of time getting to know him. He's done speaking. He's a coach. He's had a podcast. He's a doctor of chiropractic. He does a lot of things. I'm super excited to see how this conversation goes. I think we're going to learn a lot from him. So I'm going to give him a chance to just do a brief introduction on himself, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Hey, Craig, thanks for having me on the show. And yeah, currently, I moved a couple years ago, followed love and moved back closer to family and home. And I have a small chiropractic practice. So it's a small part of my focus, with a primary focus being towards speaking, coaching. And I feel like men have been a really maybe underserved, or maybe they just haven't stepped up to the plate in personal growth in many ways. And so I've started a group coaching program for men, and I'm taking men down to Central America for personal growth events as well. So a little diffuse, but all focused under the umbrella of personal growth and empowerment.
Fantastic. I would say in this day and age, more and more men are being needed to be called to lead and to help others. I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm not leaving women out of that at all, but men certainly have a need for some people to step up and help guide us. Part of the reason we're doing this podcast, we're trying to provide resources to share, to help people find the information they need to live happier, more fulfilled, more successful lives. Again, because I don't have as long a standing relationship with you, I haven't learned about you. I'm excited to unpack. How is it that you kind of briefly explained before we got on the show that you've done a whole lot of different things? I'd like to kind of understand who you were as a young adult, what led you, because I think you said at one time you were an engineer, now you're a doctor. Help us understand how you got there and where you kind of started from.
Yeah, so I think luckily, big picture, the takeaway is following my heart. And trying to blend what my mind was maybe good at or what I enjoyed with following my heart. And so I grew up in a small town in Wyoming and did a lot of mechanical things growing up, always taking apart dirt bikes and bicycles and snowmobiles, and was doing some racing. And in school, you take all your tests and they're you're good at math and science, you'd be good as an engineer. So kind of based on that, I went to school and I'm this I feel like is going to push me. It's going to use, things I'm gifted at, and I'll just be a mechanical engineer. So it's a blending of those. And so I think I went into school for the right reasons. And then when I was in school, realized I didn't want to be stuck in a cubicle in this really introverted position for the rest of my life. And so I had a history with chiropractic care. I had a football injury in 8th grade and started seeing chiropractors. And so I would get chiropractic care, and even in, undergrad, I was a rugby player. So I was getting even more chiropractic care then. And towards the end of engineering school, I thought about dropping out to go to chiropractic school. And at that point, I was burnt out on school. I didn't want the loans. And I'm I'll just get this degree and I'll find a job where they want a personality and somebody that's outgoing, but also understands kind of the technical side of things, which is what I did. I got into engineering, did 3 years as an engineer before going back to school to become a chiropractor. So I think I tried to stay in for the right reasons, but also got out for the right reasons.
What was the tipping there? Because you mentioned you thought about doing it. There was quantifiable reasons why you didn't. You went down a different path for a little while. What brought you back to chiropractic?
I think it's that little tickle that just keeps happening, right? That thing that just keeps coming up. And so, I finished out my degree, got the most, kind of social job that would, support a more outgoing personality that I could. And after a few years in that position, I was still referring like friends, family members, coworkers to my chiropractor. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I do to not be stuck in this cubicle? And, I was still playing rugby. I was playing at the men's club level. And there were a lot of chiropractors on the team that were creating their own schedules, helping people. And so it's like this gravity just kept pulling me back in that direction. And, even in thinking about this conversation today, I think there's statements like follow your passion, but also in any passion, things are going to still get difficult. So you have to know when you're supposed to leave, when you're supposed to stay, when it's a passion that isn't blended with, needs or desires from a marketplace versus a passion that is sustainable and you can just keep moving in that direction. And so I think I stayed in engineering for the right reasons when I did. And then after being in the industry for a few years, I was like, okay, this is a lifetime decision. And I was meeting a lot of people that, 30-year-old essentially kids that were complaining about their jobs like they were 60. And I'm like, dude, you have more decades left of work than you've even lived. And you're complaining this much. And so I really I think had enough little intuitive hits and saw enough little examples of what, not being where your heart or your passion, your mind are pulling you, like what that looks and feels like in a day-to-day life. And so I put in the extra effort. I kept working my full-time job, and it took me another year of prerequisites above my engineering degree to be even qualified to step into chiropractic school. And so I put in that work after hours and on the side, and and then moved to a place that felt more in integrity and felt like it was going to be more of a long-term investment versus a struggle to just stay present.
I still want to dig into the choice of chiropractic a little bit, partially because, Elite does serve a fair number of chiropractors around the country. We have not always done that. I don't know if I've shared that with you or not. And it was actually through working with one and then having an injury, like an injury I thought was going to be with me for life. I'm 31 years old, kind of injury in my elbow that came from tearing some ligaments from doing weighted pull-ups. I thought, I'm just stuck with this for life. I actually have a torn meniscus as well. And I've been drawn more and more towards chiropractic because of what I've seen it do for me. My wife has had long-term sciatica problems. Those are now not a thing that ails her on a daily basis. So I've really gotten behind that mission, and I'm curious, like, what was it for you that like really drew you towards chiropractic? Because you seem like a smart guy. You probably could have gone and done almost anything you wanted, but you chose chiropractic. Yeah.
So partially, I think it's always great when people have an experience, right? Some of the best chiropractors I know, they have this almost like a superhero. They have this origin story of like, here's what happened, here's how it turned out, and here's why I do what I do. And so for me in 8th grade, playing football, I'm on the line, there's an onside kick, I go down to get it and I get hit on top of the helmet and it compresses my spine. But, you're young and you're in the adrenaline of everything. So finished the game, everything went well. And it was a 90-minute bus ride back home from that school where we played. And by the time I got home, my neck wouldn't rotate at all. Next morning, got up, went and saw the family chiropractor. Felt so good immediately afterwards. I, unfortunately had to go right back to school. I didn't get any time off. And so from that point forward, I was just sold on chiropractic. I used it in football, basketball, track, high jump, especially when I stepped into playing rugby in undergrad. It is probably the only thing that got me through my rugby career. And so I was always sold on it. And it wasn't until later in college where I'm like, oh, wow, this is something I could do. And I had a buddy that I played rugby with that was like 4 years older than me. He had gone to school to be a chiropractor. And I'm like, oh, wow, like I could get out of engineering and do this. But it just, to be honest, at that point, I was like, I'm already focused on engineering. I'm going to finish this out. And it really took me realizing that I didn't want to be in in a cubicle with a bunch of, like, there were a lot of introverted people in my school, and I was really outgoing. And I'm like, yeah, I'd rather be interacting with people. And yes, I can do these things on the computer. I've got the ability to do it, but it's not a passion. And so there was just that, I loved the profession. I felt what I felt in my body when that friend stepped into becoming a chiropractor. I'm like, oh, wow, that'd be amazing. And I still kind of stayed my course. And it wasn't until, and then at Christmas, my junior year, I told my parents I was thinking about dropping out and going to chiropractic school. And like I said, at that point, it was just like burnt out on school, didn't want the debt. And I'm like, let's just finish this out. And I'm really a guy that believes that you can be happy anywhere. Right? I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, which a lot of people would be very unhappy with. But I was outgoing, I was outdoorsy, I did sports. Like, I believe you make your situation what it is. And so I'm like, yeah, I can just get this degree and it'll be a tool for me to get a job that I can love. And when I found that that actually wasn't the reality, after it was probably a couple years into engineering, I'm like, okay, it might sound cool when I describe I'm, building out different areas in Disneyland, and I could make my projects sound cool, but ultimately they weren't, and it wasn't fun, and I wasn't excited. So I think it was just really listening to, like, what am I passionate about? And I got to say, when I became a chiropractor, I didn't understand that piece of service, right? I wasn't a healer. I didn't think about necessarily helping people. It wasn't until I got into chiropractic and I'm like, oh, wow, people, and this kind of bridges part of the conversation we had before we started recording, but I started realizing, wow, people have a need that many times is unmet, especially if they aren't familiar with chiropractic or they've tried 10 different things and they've been told you're going to have this forever, maybe like your situation. Yeah. It really, after I got into the profession, I realized how many more things chiropractic could actually do and help with. And I really realized how many people weren't as lucky as me. They didn't have a parent that went to a chiropractor. So when they had their first injury, within probably like 18 hours, I was at the chiropractor's office, right? Or 24 hours, And so it was after I got in the profession that I realized how important it was and how many people were suffering needlessly. So for me, that part came secondary, but hopefully that unfolds a little bit more kind of the gravity that pulled me into the profession.
Definitely. Through all these conversations, again, I think I said before we started recording that I've noticed patterns or trends, and the way you're speaking, I'm hearing a lot of gratitude for situations or resources or experiences that have happened to you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you mind sharing in your experience how gratitude usually goes hand in hand with a measure of success, or how you use gratitude?
It's interesting. As a chiropractor for the last 18 years, you'll have this person that's in an exam room and you've got their file in front of you and you'll look at the age and you look at the person. And the biggest thing I've realized in the last, almost 2 decades is I'm a horrible gauge of a person's age, right? There's 30-year-olds that seem 50. There's 60-year-olds that seem 30. And I think a lot of it is there can be this fundamental or foundational level of like gratitude, joy, positive outlook, so on a certain level, I think I was just blessed with that. Through my family, through my upbringing and how I'm wired. But the ways that shows up, like in this profession, when I was seeing a chiropractor, and as soon as I told him I had signed up for and was going to chiropractic school, he's like, dude, your care is free forever now. And I was still a mechanical engineer. I had money. I was already his paying patient. He could have just kept charging me, but he's like, dude, I consider you in the profession now. And this is one of the gifts is free care. Right. So from like day one, and as I was picking the town where I was going to leave, I was maybe a year from graduation, and there were rugby buddies that lived in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I started reaching out to them and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about coming there. And I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. Right. And so I was like, hey, I'm considering being in town. And as I started finding a location, I'm like, hey, it's, it's a couple miles from where you're at. Like, I hope you won't feel like that's stepping on your toes. They're like, dude, you can set up down the hallway from us. Here's our lawyers. Here's our insurance biller. Here's our paperwork. I mean, they gave me everything. Right. And so my gratitude is just foundational to like stepping into the industry, how well supported I was. I would say by 98% of the people in the profession. Right. That seems to be like the fundamental thing. And so that really led me to be of service of anybody wanting to go to school. Like, how can I support? How can I, give free adjustments to other chiropractors? And I think that piece around gratitude and success, you have to be grateful for all the little victories along the way, right? Because in the beginning, it's not these massive numbers, like being grateful for a positive impact. My first week, I saw 3 patients, right? And for a lot of people, they'd consider that a failure. For me, I was like, wow, I'm in the game. I got the rest of my life to keep refining this, And so I think I have gratitude in the little things, and even in the struggles, because some of the worst things that have happened to me have resulted in more gold than the positive things. So yes to gratitude. And that's just a couple examples of how amazing the people in this profession have been to me. And it really taught me, this is what it means to be open-hearted, giving, not get so territorial, like really be inviting, and knowing that we're all different. So we're not actually competition.
I love that. I love hearing that your experience has been like that. I think to a certain degree, chiropractors get kind of a raw shake. And I discussed part of this with Dr. Ryan, who came on, that there's not a lot taught about business specifically in school and whatever, and that you have to find those outside resources. So to hear that there's already pre-established chiropractors that are giving back and helping and pointing you in the right direction and providing that aid is awesome. I know Dr. Ryan's like that. He has associate doctors come in and he helps work with them. And one of his key KPIs, if you haven't heard the episode, you should. It was an awesome episode.
I listened to the first part. Yeah, it sounds wonderful. I got to finish that one.
He talked about one of his key KPIs is actually how many people in a year he hears that he inspired to become a chiropractor. Mm-hmm. I thought that was incredibly interesting that he's so focused on representing what it is you guys do so well that he would actually have an impact on at least a couple people a year being inspired to go on to become a chiropractor. So I think you guys have an awesome community, and I'm getting more and more involved in it, and I just become more and more excited hearing things like that. You've already mentioned one of them about like following what your heart tells you. I think there's a lot to be said, and maybe we can unpack some of that about leveraging intuition. But what are some other key principles you feel like have been there to help be bumper rails or guide you to stay on the side of success? Again, the whole premise of this show is the fact that there are so many businesses that go under in the first couple of years of business. Most of that, I think, has to do with not having the right resources or mental outlooks or whatever. And we're trying to uncover those. So what ones are important to you? You feel like, regardless if you're a chiropractor or not, like somebody could benefit from if they're starting a business?
Yeah. There's something too about really just being able to be authentic with yourself, be honest with yourself. KPIs can really guide that. Like, A plus B is never equaling C in my business. Why is that? Right? Yep. Whether it's a funnel or it's number of new patients in the door versus how long are they sticking around. But also just how do things feel? Right? There was a place in my first year in business, like it hadn't gone as well as I had thought. And even, we talked kind of about mentors. I think mentors are amazing. They really helped me step into the industry in a great way. And beyond that, there's only so much you can get from a mentor, right? There's something that's another level or a few levels more effective with like stepping into a coaching relationship, so they can really pull you forward. And after a year in the industry, I was really flatlined. I was struggling. Like my loan money was almost depleted. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, over that first year hump, which is part of the premise of this show. And what I realized was, like, I was the problem. Wasn't my city, wasn't my location, certainly wasn't the profession, and so that's what got me to step into coaching. Was I knew that I was the plateau, I was the glass ceiling that was happening. And so realizing those areas where things aren't going well, and it can be different for everybody. Some people, I have buddies that I know the business piece just came really, really easy for them, and they might have needed more help around like their health so they can have longevity, or they may have needed support around relationships so that part of their lives could be solid as well. So I think there's something about having a self-awareness to go, here's where I need help, and then dividing that. Like, here's where maybe the business needs help, and this is my work to do. Or here's where the business needs help, and this is a CA or front desk or office manager, or, really realizing where's your place of personal growth and work and development, and where are the places that, not in an avoidant kind of way, but in a, what best serves the ecosystem of your family, your business, your health, how you're able to be of service to patients.
So because you are a coach, maybe we could dive into a little bit about that aspect of your business and how you're helping others in that way.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. In chiropractic, I got to a point where it was helping all these people, but if they're coming into the office and life is still a mess for them, whether it's financial or family or business or, mental, emotional, like, I was getting these people better, but I could still see the pain points in their life. And so that's when I, kind of started moving over into coaching, and a certain percentage of my patients needed that as well. And I loved speaking. I loved doing health talks. And so I was able just to expand that out into personal growth, motivation, inspiration. And so kind of a side business developed where, some people that come to me for coaching need chiropractic. Like, I think everybody needs chiropractic, but some it's super obvious and I can really move them in that direction. Some people that come into chiropractic need a counselor, some need, a business coach, some need a traditional coach. And so that's how the business kind of expanded. And for me, there is this body, mind, spirit piece for me that's really important. And so as much as I love helping a person with their spine, their health, that aspect of their life, I think I'm equally fulfilled when somebody comes in a difficult place in their, business or personal life, and coaching is able to help them move past that and, get away from the pain points and move towards the really positive outcomes they're hoping for.
I think there's, like, I'm sitting here reflecting, like, even in myself, I feel like there's always additional success that just continues to come the more and more I focus on how I can help others. And what I'm hearing is that you were in chiropractic and you realize this still has additional limitations to my ability to help these people, and I want to help them further, which has turned into a whole business just by following that instinct. Would you call it an instinct?
Yeah.
That draws you towards how do I be helpful? I think with some observation, I don't know tons of business owners that have gone under, but I do know a handful. And I think that if I'm reflecting on them, they're the ones that I've experienced. Some of what I think may have held them back with where they were too focused on the transactional, I need these people to give me something, as opposed to what they were putting into giving. You're a roofer, you're a HVAC, like, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. What is it that you're doing to help be of service and make somebody else's life better? And I feel like the businesses that are successful are the ones that are most focused on that. How do they go to the next level and provide better service, as opposed to, I'm doing this, so you need to give to me this thing or whatever. It's, would you call it a sense of entitlement, maybe? And it's just a backwards way to think about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's a book that I'm listening to right now called The Power of Eight. Basically what it's talking about is if a group of like at least 8 people get together and like meditate on something or pray on something or put focus or intention on something, there'll be a positive change that's shifted. And this woman's done massive studies around this, and it's really well documented. Well, the interesting thing is when let's say everybody in the group is meditating on improving Mike's arthritis issues. The other people in the group also have improvements in their in their arthritis issues. Right. So I do believe the way the universe is wired, like what we put out also comes back to us. Right. And I think there's something about just if you have a heart of service, if you're wanting to help people because you truly care that their sciatica goes away or that their elbow starts working better or that the headaches go away or that they can play with their grandkids. If you're doing it from that rather than just the dollar amount that's walking in and out of the door every day, then I do believe those are the successful businesses. I think you can push the financial thing and you'll get to a certain point, but I don't think it's a stable foundation. It's not sustainable. People, probably a lot of turnover. People aren't going to want to work in a business like that. Right. So there's something, and you probably don't want to refer somebody to a business like that. And then the other caveat is if you're doing all this beautiful work for people, there's a fair energetic exchange, right? If somebody's not making enough money for what they're offering, it'll be out of balance. And if you're not charging enough, that business doesn't grow. People feel guilty for receiving that healing, right? Mm-hmm. So I've heard it in so many places, like if you raise your prices appropriately, right? Patients will get better results. Coaching clients get better results. People get more out of a speaking event when you do that. So I think it's about having all the things be congruent and in alignment, So I think service plus fair energetic exchange is an awesome business model, no matter what industry you're in.
Definitely agree with that. And it is interesting how there are things we can't necessarily quantitatively measure at this moment with what we have available to us. And yet there's enough of a consistency in that reaction to know that mechanically something occurs there. Whenever you put good things out, whenever you are focused on the right things, it comes back to you reciprocally. And it's, I don't know, you mentioned some stuff about like quantum mechanics or whatever before we got on. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because that is one thing that continuously fascinates me. This is completely aside from the whole show and everything we're talking about. Just in general, life, business, the hidden mechanicals that are happening outside of our field of vision.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think some of the best business people we know, they just intuitively tap into it, right? If you meet somebody who's charismatic, maybe they don't have neurolinguistic programming training to sell from stage or be a politician or whatever it might be, but that's naturally how they're wired, right? Or you hear statements like, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. And we know that there's energy fields that extend about 10 feet, or, a business person will be like, gosh, I just had a gut instinct. Timing wasn't right. Numbers weren't right, but I just had a gut instinct. This was the way to go, and we've got quotes from Steve Jobs and Oprah, and Einstein's theory of relativity came from a dream. And so I think there's this universe that's interacting with us in so many different ways. And so if you can blend, like one of my focuses on blending ancient wisdom with modern transformation, right? Some of the stuff we know, it's because, people have been meditating for thousands of years. And when we hook their brains up, we can see the positive impact that's had, right? So now business people and other people, moms, dads, people will do that for the outcome because they know that it works. And there's things that we know based on a lot of current research that if we can just use all the tools that are out there, then we can, I think, get the best results that we can. And yeah, it's part of that has been just my joy. When I saw that plateau in myself and I started getting coaching, and that would have been in like 2005 or six, I was like, oh, wow, this stuff's amazing. And there's kind of this like cross training that happens as well. You might do something to improve your business and you're like, wow, if I pull that into my relationship, things actually go better here as well. Or if you, like for me, I did a half Ironman in 2016 and I was already fairly fit, but it was outside of what I knew. I'd never ridden a road bike. I didn't enjoy, I loved swimming in a lake. I never did laps in a pool. And I didn't actually enjoy running on, hard surfaces. I might do a little trail running, but I saw the half Ironman as a way to do cross training for my entire life. And I would have so much energy. I was like vibrating above all my normal stressors didn't affect me anymore because I was vibrating so high and I had so much energy. And I made more money in the 6 months I was training for that, stepped into a new relationship, wrote a chapter for a book. Like I got so much done, but I hadn't put any additional focus on my business. So I think that, in the places that we naturally fall into those gifts and those like, oh, if I do this thing works, keep leveraging it. And then finding out more and more, like always being a student of life and of quantum physics and those things that most interest us, then we can just add synergy to what's happening. And as an example, in my office, in my first office, we would, at the end of a week, we would pull files of people that we hadn't seen in 2 or more weeks. And we would go through them and just look at them together. Oh, yeah, I wonder what Steve's up to. Oh, we're missing Sally. And usually we would hear from a small percentage of those people in the next week. And then the ones that we hadn't heard from, we would reach out to them that following Friday. And a lot of them we would reach out to, they'd be like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about you. I've been meaning to reach out. Right? So something small like that, it's, you can't put your finger on it. But there's something about the universe. We all have an experience when somebody's looking at us and we turn around and catch them staring at us. And we've all had those experiences where it's like, yeah, what's Joe been up to? I haven't talked to that dude in a decade. And the phone rings a little bit later and it's Joe. Right? So there is this bigger universe that we're connected to. And I love, leveraging all the left brain, strategy and tactics and all the stuff that's repeatable and quantifiable. And I love blending in these other pieces that bring more synergy and magic and being conscious about that as well.
I love that approach. And if we're getting too woo-woo for everybody, I want you to just take a step back for a minute and think about like meditation for an example. If you were to rewind just like 10 or 15 years, it has become way more mainstream. And a lot of that is because you are looking around and seeing corporate giants doing it. And you're going, well, I want to imitate what they're doing. You're accepting it because it worked for them. I don't think it's woo-woo at all. I've actually practiced meditation since the time I was like 10. And I got made fun of by people and they thought I was weird. And I think you're actually the appropriate person to discuss this with. Whenever I was a child, I feel like I intuitively knew certain things and that I had more control over the outcomes I wanted. And over time, I was taught like, no, you can't just like think that, or you can't just like focus on that and it's going to happen. And I'm like, but it has been. It has been. It has consistently done so. And it's like trained out of you. I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but like I've traveled this journey where I felt like I knew a lot of these things intuitively as a child. Then I'm taught that I'm not supposed to think that way and that that's not how the world works. And then I'm finding more and more that those gut feelings that I had, or those ways I was operating as a young adult, are actually how it works. And the more I lean into it, the more successful we get in this later stage of my life. Have you experienced any of that, just out of curiosity?
To be honest, I'm a little jealous. I would say I was very disconnected as a child, right? I was this crazy little athlete, and I would, try to do flips on my BMX bike. And so I was very physical and very active. And I would say had this belief system that, because I was a super skinny kid, but I still was one of the harder hitters on my football team. And, so I just kind of had this idea that if I wanted to do it, I could. But I wouldn't say that I was connected to my intuition in that way. That's been something that came to me closer to the age of 30. But I believe that what you're saying is exactly true. And the reality is, we're animals, right? We are just animals. And most animals on the planet know when there's going to be a weather change. They know when to hibernate or to migrate, or they're able to do these things. And we've been really disconnected in that. I think modern society says everything comes from the brain, right? And I believe that in most things, if you can combine that left and right brain, if you can be a good listener, but also be an action taker, a lot of people I think that are out of balance, if their business isn't going well, this may be something to look at. We have people that listen a lot, get a lot of intuitions, get a lot of ideas. If they don't take action on that, nothing happens. If Steve Jobs got those intuitions, but didn't massively, shift the number of products that Apple was producing at the time when he came back, right? It's a whole different story. And then the other thing that we have, and I think we especially have this in the US, is Gary Vee has told everybody just to hustle, right? And people are celebrating. If you said I worked 80 hours last week rather than 40, it's like a badge of honor. And so we have people taking a ton of action, but I don't know that they're listening all that well. And I think that leads to, conversations like, yeah, what happened to Blockbuster? Yeah, what happened to, some of these companies that were doing great and just kept doing what they were doing, but weren't able to listen to their surroundings and to make shifts and adapt and stay, in flow. And so I think both those things are important. And I love that you had it growing up, you went away from this, you know what that feels like. And now popular society and science and research and personal growth is saying, this is acceptable and it's a superpower. So you might want to tap back into it.
Yeah. And part of, certain men's groups that support each other and holding each other accountable to doing so, because of the weight and the impact it has on all outcomes of your life. If I sit down and do breath work and I do meditation, there are days that I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm too busy. I got to get this thing done and this thing done and this thing done for our clients. And yet I do those things so much better, and the result is so much more powerful for our customers if I will sit and take that time for myself. We get to the other side of Christmas. I'm jumping back into 75 hard. That is not an easy thing to accomplish. And I failed twice that I've done that right at the very end, unfortunately. But I feel the power that comes out of it. I feel how much I get accomplished, how much more efficient I am. And that's crazy because you got to steal close to 2 hours a day just for the exercise. Right.
Yeah.
And part of that has to be done outside, and there's an uncomfortability to that. And yet, again, one of those things that I've intuitively, seemingly understood throughout my life without anybody preaching it to me is every time I focus on my health, I get better outcomes in every aspect of life, relationships, financials, business, you name it. Everything seems to work better. So pouring into those cups, I think, is important. You mentioned Gary Vee, and I love Gary Vee, and I think so many people have misinterpreted some of his message, or maybe I'm misinterpreting it. That's why I love him so much. He does preach hustle. He does preach hustle a lot. I also am a strong believer in delaying gratitude. I feel like so many people want something instantaneous. I think that's another reason why certain business owners might fail. It's not that they would have failed. They just gave up too soon, maybe. What are your thoughts or takeaways on that?
Yeah, and I use kind of that hustle thing as an example, and there's a lot of other messaging that he shares that I really believe in. And so I think anything anytime something is taken to an extreme, it usually becomes not true.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at coaching like, oh, well, this always happens, or this never happens, or anything that's like a word to an extreme like that, I just believe is never true. And so even with that hustle piece, like I definitely hustle during the day. And, you know, there's these places where it's like, at one point, dude, I was doing all this stuff so I could reduce the amount of sleep that I received every night. I would like cut back 15 minutes every week. And I was doing this subliminal messaging throughout the night. And I'm like, God, if I could go to bed at midnight and get up at 4 a.m. like Wayne Dyer, like I would be killing it. And, you know, and then it's years, and I would get down to like 6 hours and I would crash, you know, and then have to change everything up. And I was never able to do it. I know some people can. I'm not able to. But now we have a ton of research about, oh, yeah, like not getting enough sleep, early dementia, and just all, reduced productivity anyway. And so I think for me, trying to come in with that balanced approach, and I'll like cherry pick, like I did 75 hard to when I moved, I traveled through Central America for 3 months, kind of in the interim on this spiritual walkabout. And then when I came home, first thing I did was 75 hard with my girlfriend. I'm like, yeah, I need to get this rocket ship going, right? I need to get back into shape. I need to get into business momentum. Like I need to do all these things. And so, but to be honest, that for me, also not very well balanced. The amount of water I was drinking in that program, I think is more than what my body needs. And there were some nights I would wake up 4 different times to go to the bathroom. Right. And so I think using things intelligently, like I might do a version of 75 hard right after the new year again, just because I'm wanting to.
Hold each other accountable. Always.
What's that?
Let me know. We'll do it together.
Well, I was thinking about that because, yeah, luckily, like I did it with my girlfriend and then a best friend over in Atlanta, and that really helped, you know, and we made it through in one shot without any missteps. But there was one night we were climbing into bed and we're like, oh, shoot, we forgot the photo. So we jumped out of bed and flipped the lights back on and got our photo. But yeah, would love that. And I think accountability is a big thing, right? The people that know what you're doing, what you're wanting to do. I have a buddy that's wanting to launch something this week, and we were in an accountability group like 2 or 3 years ago. He messaged me on Monday. He's like, here's the 2 things I'm hoping to do this week. Can you keep me accountable, you know, and we'll touch base on Friday? Yeah, brother. So I got a text from him yesterday. He's got 95% of everything already done this week. But, you know, how can we lean into all these tools, you know? And one thing that I think I've thought about a couple times in our conversation is just looking at like courage and fear, right? Like no matter where people are in their business or their relationship or whatever, I think there's always an edge of fear or uneasiness or anxiety or avoidance, or even this activity should only use a little bit of energy, but every time I do it, it zaps a lot more energy than it deserves, right? Like if we can figure out where those areas of resistance are and then consciously move through them, you know, I use all these tools and tactics because it's so easy to like do amazing and then plateau. And it may not be about pushing harder. It may be about, oh, I'm going to raise my health and break through this other thing. Or, you know, if I can be worse. Yeah, if I can be courageous over here, because I think that's part of the stuff as well, whether it's cold water or a workout or it's whatever you're doing. If you overcome those like kind of like little courageous pieces, makes the rest of the day easier. And then that muscle of courage and resilience and grit and persistence gets woven into your DNA. And then you're like, oh, this is just how I do things. You know, so you create that momentum of courage and positive action. And so, yeah, I think the topic gets really big when you start pulling on any of the threads. And yeah. I love it. Like I love personal growth. I love diving into it.
I think something that everybody should know, but is worth stating is I don't think any of us are perfect at it, and it's constantly readjusting, recalibrating. If I'm being incredibly honest, I had one of the worst days I've had in like 5 years. If I look back and analyze what was going on, there's nothing truly that bad happening. It wasn't anything we couldn't overcome, but I just felt beat. Like, it's been a long year. We've spent a lot of time focusing on refining our processes, and some people have left our company because they were not furthering our mission or our goal, not helping our customers. And something you were just saying a second ago, the lesson or whatever I want to focus in on is the courage piece. You don't always have to go it alone. One of the biggest things that I did for myself on that day as I was struggling was I reached out to a mentor and a friend that I trust. I was just very honest with them about where I was at mentally. Again, physically, nothing was wrong. Business is great. Things are getting done. But mentally, I wasn't good, and I needed that help, and I didn't feel like I had the courage to keep going. And having and building a support system of people that have been where you want to go, far further ahead than you, have been through those experiences, or just having a better season. There may be in a different season where they're in a good headspace to support you, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the piece that doesn't get talked about that often, especially with these people we look up to and we've read their books and paid for their programs. And a lot of times you only hear about their tough days when it makes it into a book and it's like, oh, that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
Right. But you're not hearing about that. Like, oh yeah, like I woke up today and just feel off. And I think there's something about listening to that as well. Like, one of the kind of like analogies or metaphors that I use for like some of those emotions, there's almost these, like, if you're at the pool and you can hold like one of those like striped beach balls under the water, like we can do that at the pool. But as you start talking and hanging out and maybe playing with the kids, or you're in conversation, at some point that beach ball is going to pop up and hit somebody in the chin.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in life, like, we are taught to just keep moving forward, and especially as men, wrapping around to that topic again, like we're taught, like, just keep going, don't show it, be strong, be courageous, push through. And sometimes, and here's again that crossover of it's not always one or the other. And to be honest, when was it? It was yesterday. Yeah, I didn't know why midday I'm feeling off. And I'm like, relationships good, finances are good, business is good. I couldn't nail down what exactly it was that I was feeling, but I was feeling it. And so just taking a pause and to like get clarity and acknowledge it. And, I took a little break midday, like 30 minutes, to kind of refocus and go, I don't know what it is. There's nothing I can change right now. I just need to keep moving forward. And to be honest, I didn't get clarity about what that was. There's other times where something will come up and I'm like, oh, this, here's what it is. I've tried going around it a bunch of different ways. My mind will tell me it's not a big deal, but my body keeps telling me something different. And then maybe that's the time to do some cleanup work. Maybe I just tell somebody and share. Maybe I need some coaching, some counseling, some neurolinguistic programming. Maybe I need to shift up something I'm doing in my business. So I think that idea of listening and like being able to do what you need to, not just to push it down and like be powerful at pushing past it, but actually address it and take care of it. And I think that's the stuff that will keep us from breaking in the future. It's the thing that, it feels like a loss in that day maybe, but that extra energy to keep that beach ball under the pool over the course of months and years and decades, like it just has a negative impact. So yeah, I try to be really holistic in all the things I'm doing. And yeah, some days you push through and some days you have to stop and address it and clean up whatever mess is waiting there for you.
I really like your analogy of the beach ball. I would add to it that I think the longer you hold on to it, the more air is getting pumped into that ball, which makes it that.
Absolutely. I agree.
I don't think you are going to ever hold on to something for your entire life. It is likely to pop up and pop you in the chin. And I think that there's something to be said for just taking time when it's appropriate. Sometimes you need to hold it under the water. Sometimes you need to push past to get to a place, right? It's like, say in an emergency situation that things are going on. Not everybody's the same. Usually whenever I've been put in a situation that's incredibly stressful, I move, I react to take care of things. And then after I've got to go sit down and decompress. I push past it in the moment because it's not going to serve me well to address it then and there. But I do have to go back and address it later. This is a weird one. And I'm just a real big animal lover, but I came across a deer almost a month and a half ago that had been hit by a vehicle. It immediately became an emergency situation because I'm in a 2-lane highway. There's cars coming. He's trying to wander into the next lane. I realize this is going to cause an accident. So I immediately throw on my blinkers, hop out. I won't spend a super long time on this story, but I had to go home and sit down and decompress from that situation because it hurt my heart for the deer. We ended up having to put a state trooper showed up and helped take care or address him. There was a guy that actually hit the deer. He was tore up. Ironically, a fight tried to break out. The guy came back after having hit the deer, but he came back like 10 or 15 minutes later. I don't know what the situation was or how he made his way back, but some lady tried to call him out and was like, well, you just left. You just, didn't do anything. You just left and tried to start a fight. So there was a lot going on, and there was not any time for Craig to sit and dwell on the emotional side. Again, I'm an animal lover, and it just absolutely hurt my heart watching that deer suffer. So there's times you have to push past, but then it needs to be addressed, and you need to go sit down and address those. I would say if you're trying to run a business, you're going to have plenty of those things, and you should take the time, make the time even, to sit and address those things. And again, find a support system of good people that you can rely on, because sometimes you're going to need them to also help step through those, I think.
Yeah, I think that's massively important. And a lot of times, we have so many micro stresses in our day that we don't take time to slow down, decompress, address. And I think, whether it's meditation or walks in nature or going to the gym or, some stuff you process with a spouse, journaling, there's so many ways to kind of let that air out of the beach ball and eventually remove it from the pool. And if you think about if you've seen these videos where a gazelle gets chased by oh my God, a panther, but a leopard. Yeah. So, and it gets away and then it goes out in the bushes and it falls down and shakes and gets all that energy out. And then it walks off like it's Tuesday afternoon. Right. And we're not the smartest animals on the planet in that way. We don't process and let go of our emotions and good ways. And every day is a stressor. I tell people, when I'm getting them on adrenal support, we haven't evolved fast enough to drive a vehicle at 60 miles an hour. Not totally. It's a bigger stress than I think most people realize. And then you add in, all the complications of business and relationship and day-to-day life. We just need to do that. And it's kind of like a race car, right? A race car just doesn't keep racing till it breaks. Don't they redo those motors after every race? Yeah. How do you stay sharp? How do you clean up the damage that happened, in whatever race you're in? And so all those things, and even for the coaching that I do, it's not about peaking out and busting it for the next month. It's is this sustainable for years or decades? Are you building a machine in your life that's sustainable long term?
I really like how this conversation's gone, because I feel yeah, we could sit down and we could talk tactics for how to get customers or specific books, which before we get done here, if you've got any books that you'd like to share that have been impactful, I want to talk about those real quick. But I think something else is happening here that is incredibly important, where we're kind of peeling back and hopefully helping you realize that there are non-tactical things from a perspective of self-care or mental health that go into running a business and running it successfully. And in the world that we live in, where we have the Instagrams or whatever, it's far too easy. One of my favorite things from a lot of my mentors has nothing to do with the tactical coaching, like here's where you invest your money or how you get customers or any of that stuff. It's the fact that on a day that I'm struggling with how to build my team better, or how to get them to cooperate better, and they're fighting and it's causing problems in the company, I'm like, why is every one of my mentors, they have this figured out? Invariably when I go talk to them, I find out that they don't have it either. They still have those problems. And I think that part of what we're discussing here is that it is okay that those problems exist. And that may give you just that little bit of extra courage to keep moving forward. Again, I think that part of the businesses that go under didn't necessarily have to. They maybe just gave up too soon. They were looking for that instant gratification. They thought something was wrong with them. They were trying to measure against something that is, just the surface level of an iceberg. And so I like that the conversation is kind of wrapped around that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So a couple things that have popped up that kind of maybe pull things together. Like we talked about service in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Part of what attracted me to like your podcast, because we talked, I really believe like if anybody's needing more patients, more clients, like if your marketing's not working, reach out. I mean, that's how you and I got in contact was I'm like, how do I add some extra growth in this area? And then after the invitation to the podcast, I looked at it, and the foundation of your podcast is service.
Yep.
Right? Like how can I educate? How can I empower? How can I help lift people up? And so, I love that you have that service piece woven into this. Another thing that I've been thinking about is, with you saying like I was an empath, or I was whatever words you used around that, like for all of us, dude, it's been a crazy 3 years, right? We're still not out of the woods. We're never going back to the planet, the life, the business that we had in 2019, And so a lot of times realizing when outside stuff happens, it affects us, right? We are all connected. If there's a war happening, it affects us. If, where I'm at now, this county kind of closed down. 5 miles away is a different county. Totally felt different. We started doing date night, in this town like 10 miles away because it felt like you're on a whole other planet, And so just realizing that things outside of your gravity can affect you. So also just allowing for that and being aware that plays into things. And then for all of this, there's always going to be a rub, Here's the rub I need to do to grow my business. Here's the rub I need to do to maintain balance between, my business and my relationship with my lady. There's always, I kind of laid off the workouts after a shoulder injury, and now my slacks. I either need to change my habits right now, or I'm gonna have to start buying different slacks, right? There's always something that's giving us information about an opportunity for growth. And I think these conversations are great because hopefully, I'm always wanting not just inspiration because that goes away, but like, can people get transformation? And I think in a conversation like this, hopefully everybody has one area where they're like, oh, wow, I'm afraid of this. It drains too much energy. I avoid it. Cool. If there's a fear, what do you need to do to harness courage, or team, or a mentor, or an accountability partner? Like, what do you need to do to push through that? And with conversations like this, every book I read, it's not so much about blasting through it, but like, can I get all the juice out of it? And can I implement? And can I have it create a shift in whatever area of my life it's focused on? And so, I like seeing how these conversations open up, because afterwards, I usually sit down and write notes, and I'm like, oh yeah, like here's something you said that I need to weave into what I'm already doing. So
everybody always has an interesting and unique perspective. That is a big reason I'm doing this podcast and trying to find people that are willing to come on and share, is because sometimes it's just saying the same bit of information you already know, and it's slightly different method. I think I told you about Dakota, and it's one statement that unlocked how to do sales better, and made it actually fun and enjoyable to me, as opposed to previously it was, I just hated it. Absolutely hated it. And now I see it as an opportunity to serve people better, and that excites me. You've already given me over an hour of your time. And before we get off here, you explained that you're taking men down to South America as part of your coaching program. Tell us a little bit about that. Give us a little teaser, and then how people could find out more about that if you're willing to take on more people. I'm actually kind of curious about that myself. And then, again, before we hop off here, maybe top 2 books that you would recommend every business owner to read. My book list continues to grow. I'm reading like 11 books right now at once. And then if there's any people, like we mentioned Gary Vee, I think we mentioned Brendon Burchard. You're certified under Brendon Burchard. Any additional people that you would recommend following that have been influential in your success?
Yeah, gosh, multifaceted question.
Yep.
So I'll start the trips to Central and South America. I'm doing a trip to Mexico in February. And so in that trip, like, I'm wanting things, first of all, you just get more when it's experiential like that, right? If you can get away from your phone and being a good spouse and a good dad and, managing all those things, if you can be immersed in something, I believe it helps transformation happen. For years, I would go do a 4-day vision quest, in the forest. I couldn't see anybody, no food, no water, no cell phones, no journals, like no distractions. And it was like the best vacation every year. And so I'm wanting to help men get out of their day to day. So in Mexico, I've got a Mexican shaman that's going to do day Mescal or sweat lodge for us. He also does this sensory experience. We'll be going to Chichen Itza. So yes, we'll see some of the local things. I want it to be like this really memorable experience. And I also know there's tremendous takeaways that will happen there. We'll be there during a new moon. There'll be a fire ceremony. I'm going to weave in a lot of high performance coaching things. And in an experience like that, we'll also be looking at courage and fear. And so when you get away from everything and when you get surrounded by a group like that, the things that need to come up will, and then it makes it a lot easier to move past them, So that's kind of the focus. And I've got future trips planned in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Guatemala. I really love that region. I've spent 3 months one time and 4 months another time traveling down there, as well as smaller trips. And again, those ancient wisdoms, like, there is stuff that can happen in a moment in an experience like that may not happen in a decade of, counseling or therapy or coaching.
Right.
So
how would people link up with you to do that if we wanted to?
Yeah. So basically Dr. Morgan Oaks, Oaks. That's where I'm at on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, my website, drmorganoaks.com.
Okay.
And I always, a lot of times I'll get into conversations with people, just jump online, see what they're needing. Sometimes I'm the resource for them. Sometimes it's like, hey, watch these YouTube videos, read this book, and let me know how that goes 3 months from now. But I love being just a resource and empowering people. And so I think that's the big picture of all of that. And then books I would recommend, one that I really loved from last year was Never Lose a Customer Again.
Do you remember who?
Now, that being said, on an NLP level, I don't necessarily agree with it. One of the things I love about NLP is you need to really talk about the affirmative. This was probably what you were doing as a child. Like, oh, I want this thing. I want to experience this thing or this feeling. And it would happen. Yep. A lot of times we get into like, I don't want to experience this. And the unconscious mind doesn't hear don't. So then we're inviting in what we say we don't want. And I always think it's brilliant. I never heard anybody else talk about this. Tony Robbins puts out this thing, I'm not your guru. So
Yep.
basically he's telling millions and billions of people on an unconscious level that he is your guru. So anyway, I don't love the title of that book, but it looks at the entire sales process as well as maintaining a customer. And it gives lots of ideas of like how these high level companies are making their experiences memorable. And so I used that, and I was like, okay, can I come up with one new thing in each of my businesses at each of these sales phases to make it special? You know, some of them cost money, most of them don't. You know, a lot of them can be automated, but that was a book that really helped me add some depth and look at my customer experience different. Okay. And it's interesting. The other book that came in, probably not one that gets recommended on a business level, but I read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho probably once a year since 2005.
That is the second time that book has come up to me in the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to put that on my list.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's, you know, and it's one of those, like, I always like, where do you find yourself in a story? What part of the story most resonates? And each time I look at it, I'm like, yeah, where am I on my path? It's a great story. You could read the book in an afternoon if you wanted to. And consistently for like 16, 17 years, I'm always getting different takeaways from it. So it motivates me in a different way.
Awesome. People you would suggest following that have been influential. I won't put a number on it. So if you got 10 or 12, line us out. Who do we follow? Yeah,
that's interesting. Brendan Burchard's probably been one of the bigger motivators. It's interesting. I'm never good at this game. I used to do stand-up comedy, and I love comedy. And when people ask me who my favorite comics are, I always freeze. And so, you know, usually like on Instagram, I'll go to that search function, and like the top 10 people that I'm usually really dipping into, I'll follow them. They just pop up there so I can stay in that routine. So yeah, it's interesting. I am freezing on that one.
No worries. Well, shoot, man, I have loved this conversation. It's taken a slightly different turn than some of the others that I've had on. Not to take away from it. I think it's been amazing. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk to us. I will definitely post the links to your website and stuff. That way, if people want to reach out and potentially go explore South America with you, I think they'll get a lot out of it. In fact, I'm sitting here wondering if I can convince my wife to let me go. So we'll link up on that. And the new year comes around. Let's do 75 hard together. But again, I really appreciate you coming on. I think you've shared a lot of valuable information, and hopefully we've helped some people out in their experience. Anything closing?
Yeah, you know, again, I hope that as people listen to this, like, what's that one thing, right? It only takes one thing, even in like a week-long retreat. It only takes one thing to make it all worthwhile. So hopefully people know what that one thing is, and that they can figure out a way in the next 24 hours to step into it, take that first step. And again, I really appreciate being on here. Like I said, I could tell that the roots of this podcast are based in service. And so grateful for you and what you're doing for the chiropractic and business community. And yeah, wonderful conversation, brother. I appreciate it.